Good morning, everyone. I know this is, the first session of the day of the last day of the conference, so thank you all for actually getting up and being part of this. My name is Kay Chopard. In my day job, I am the executive director of the Kantara Initiative, which is a nonprofit organization. I'm based myself in Washington, D.C., but I have been a volunteer member and leader of the Women in Identity organization for several years now, basically since we formed it. And so they asked me, I serve as a member of the Global Board of Directors, and I say global because it's very much an international organization. So there are people from other countries who are on the Board of Directors with me. And I'm the only one from the Global Board who was at Identiverse, so I drew the short straw. And they said, would you please talk about women in identity? So I want to try to go through, what we are and what we do, and some of the more recent research that we're doing, which is why the title, Closing the ID Gap, the ID Code of Conduct, which is a very specific project that we're working on. So, we really got started around this because Women in Identity as an organization, in the very beginning, it was really a lot of folks coming together and saying, we lack diversity in the industry, right, among practitioners, but how we see that playing out is the lack of diversity and inclusion in product development, right? So identity products are suffering from that. And this goes well beyond, and I know you maybe sat in on some other sessions here at Identiverse, this goes well beyond biometrics, right? This is really, we're talking about diversity and inclusion that is very expansive. So we began to look at the problem and realized that if we wanted to be effective, we didn't just want this to be a social group, right? This could just be a network of identity professionals who all come together and say, we think this is, an important problem and we could all commiserate. We really want to be organization to do something substantive. So we looked at the problem. Over 1.1 billion people worldwide cannot prove their claimed identity. And this actually comes from the World Bank, a report that they did, which I actually said to the folks who helped me with this, I need the citation. So if you'd like the citation to where the World Bank got this research, I'm happy to share. And that obviously is a lot of people who can't access what are really basic services that require identity. And it causes a great deal of distress for people living in both developed nations who can't get this and in emerging economies. And I point this out, if we had a little bit longer session, we've actually, as part of our research, interviewed people who have essentially been excluded from getting digital identities in both a developed economy and an emerging one, to hear their stories, so that we hope it brings to life some of the statistics that we're talking about, and you get a sense of what's the real impact. All of those things are on the Women in Identity website, so you could link and actually listen to a lot of those different interviews, and I encourage you to do so. I'll come back to that in a minute. We looked at McKinsey research, which estimates that about 3 to 13% growth in GDP could potentially be realized if ID systems were actually more inclusive. So that is a lot of unrealized revenue for ID companies, for banks, for other sectors, and so on. And so when we started to look at the scope of the problem, and let me also just kind of inject my own little personal opinion here, but one of the things that I keep reading is how diversity and inclusion, all these things that we talk about, impacts the bottom line for companies. There's lots of research to show when you have diverse management and diverse, just in the product development, it increases the bottom line for those companies. Those companies make more money, and yet that doesn't seem to have translated into actual practice. So I sort of assumed, this is that might in fact be the factor. But it has not been. And this kind of shows us what that problem, at least money-wise, really shows us. And so anyway, it was a real impetus for us to try to address this. I just wanted to give you a little bit more background. As I mentioned, Women in Identity, we're a nonprofit membership organization. We actually are registered both in the U.S. and in the U.K. We're actually in more countries than that, but to be honest, the tax laws in those countries meant it was easier for companies to work with us. So in the U.S., we're a registered nonprofit corporation, actually in the state of Virginia, which really was not a big deal. It was kind of like we could be registered anywhere. But we have gone through the process, and we are designated by the IRS as a 501c3. So it's a charitable organization in the U.S. In the U.K., we are registered with Company House, which is where all companies must register, and the process is very different for being declared a charity, and we're actually still working through that process. This is like year 2 of going through being recognized as a charitable organization there. It's just very different, and as an attorney practicing in the U.S., I was like, oh my God, I couldn't believe they would make it so hard. But it's all good because we're getting there. We still function as a nonprofit. Our purpose, if you will, is to promote parity with respect to opportunity, reward, recognition, professional mobility, and we try to do these things. We try to achieve some of this change with respect to diversity, and while the title is Women in Identity, which is kind of the name we started with and is just stuck, we have talked about a name change a million times. But all the diversity that we're really trying to address is not just gender, it's race, ethnicity, sexual orientation or identity, creed, social status, intersectionality, meaning, an African American woman has to deal with more than one of these issues. And trying to find a name for an organization that lists all the possible ways for diversity, we just haven't figured out a good way. So if you have a good idea, let me know. But part of the reason I want to say this is because you heard me say I'm a volunteer, and we rely on volunteers because we're basically a startup. We have volunteers who are both men and women, right? We can't tackle these diversity issues unless we are inclusive ourselves. So we rely on our volunteers, and our volunteers are also very diverse. So just think about that if you have any interest. So I mentioned that we are we are governed by a global board of directors. So we have legal requirements in both countries which require us to have boards of directors specific to those organizations. But really what we try to do is have this global board which has representatives from both of those companies as well as others, right? So we have someone from Canada, for example, who's on there, and others. And they really try to help make sure that we're organized on that sort of international level, and so that we're not doing different things in different places or saying different things. We want to make sure that we all have the same message, even though one of the things that we have learned, I will tell you, is that different countries and cultures face sometimes a little bit different challenges. So that's, it's hard to take that into account, but we're still all aiming for the same thing. We have a volunteer team of leaders like myself. We also have an advisory board, a lot of which comes from industry, to also sort of continue to give us input. The board of directors have the fiduciary responsibility for the organization, and the advisory board really provides input about what's happening, what they think our strategies should be, what they think should be the priorities, and that kind of input and recommendations. So what we've done is, the sense of the organization is, because of all these diversity and inclusion issues, there are a lot of challenges facing people in the identity industry. And what we didn't want to do was add another challenge, another hurdle, which is money, right? So we decided, rightly or wrongly, we'll see how this works, but that membership will be because while we are nonprofit, anyone here who's ever been an entrepreneur, anyone here who works in a business, you don't keep the lights on for nothing, So we have to, just to have a website and all of those things requires dollars. So what we've done is we have looked to companies, to corporations, to organizations to support us financially. And what we've asked them to do is make a financial commitment to these issues. So don't just pay lip service. We really want you to step up to the plate and commit to supporting the work of this organization, but also, I think, a real commitment to all of the things included in diversity across the board. So this is our vision: digital identity solutions built for everyone, are built by everyone. This is our official mission statement: to drive digital identity industry to build solutions with diverse teams to promote universal access, which enables civic, social, and economic empowerment around the world. Those are pretty lofty goals, I think, and that's why we really need we need people to volunteer, we need companies to support us financially. There's a lot that goes into this, and we'll talk a little bit more. This is a complicated issue, and I'm guessing if you're in this room, you realize that it's a complicated issue. So it's going to take a lot of different ways to address it. As an organization, as I said, we are largely volunteer run. Recently, we hired a part-time executive director. We've hired a part-time administrative person because we're realizing that, unfortunately, when you have a day job, it is hard to devote the time and energy that it takes to run an international organization because, my day job is kind of demanding already. So if I'm already working 60 hours a week, it's really hard to find the time to run this organization too, right? And here's how we've grown in just a few years. So we now have more than 2,500 members and supporters. We have about 40 volunteer leaders around the world. We co-host or we sponsor or we participate in about 30 different types of events. Identiverse would be one of those. And we actually now have members, and in most countries, some kind of leadership in 32 countries. I feel like just a year ago, I did a similar type of presentation, and that number was like 15. It's amazing how this has grown exponentially, and just to sort of take off my women in identity hat and put on my Kantara hat, Kantara also has made this a priority issue, and we're doing a survey, and the first company who responded was from Japan. And the Japanese company said, this is not much of an issue. Businesses don't pay attention to this in Japan. So what do we do now, kind of a thing, right? So it's exciting, but, different countries are facing different hurdles. Some of the things that we do, we try to really foster relationships among diverse groups of people in different parts of the industry. We try to create opportunities for more diverse representation, especially at industry events. So there are often multiple conferences where the organizers come to us and say, we'd like to have more diversity in our speakers. So could you help us find, people that have both the expertise on a topic, but maybe have a more diverse background so that our panel doesn't look homogenous, right? And so we participate in a lot of ways with conference organizers and those kinds of leaders around the country for industry events. We also, as I mentioned, I think when we first started, it felt more like a group of people who came together and acknowledged that there were issues and shared experiences, right? And then we realized, well, to be honest, we want to change the world. And to change the world, being in a little social group is not going to get us there, right? So we've really tried to up our game. And we said, you know what? We have to do substantive things if we're really going to affect real change. So we're trying to do research. We try to expand our partnerships. We strive to have very open communications and be a transparent organization about what we're doing, the things that we're seeing, right? What we're trying to do. And we try to do a lot more informative networking events. So one of the sort of blessings in disguise, the silver linings of the pandemic has been the fact that now people are so used to virtual meetings that no one gives a second thought. And we've been able to participate in so many ways around the world that it's really helped us to create a very meaningful collaborative environment. And I'll give you one tiny little example. When the pandemic first happened, we, before we were used to having, living our whole day on virtual meetings, we actually stood up a Zoom, what we call a coffee call with Women in Identity. And we said, you know what, we're going to meet for half an hour every day because people were saying I'm feeling so isolated, I have no one to talk to, right? And we did these coffee calls every day. Well, then our life became overrun with all of those virtual meetings. And so we reduced that. We went to once a week, and then we've gone. Now, we're still doing these. And the main reason, I think, is because we develop networks. We develop support systems. We develop friendships and ways to help people grow in their profession that are now international. So, by example, Friday morning in Asia and Oceania, which is Thursday evening here in the States, or Thursday afternoon, every other week we still have a call. And there are people there from Japan, and India, and New Zealand, and Australia. I feel like since the pandemic, we have helped people move through their career and take new jobs and all kinds of things. But it was the kind of thing that no one wanted to give up, even though now, there's a little burnout for all of that. But I think the acceptance of that kind of a format has made a huge difference, and that's just one tiny little way that we have tried to create that collaborative environment. How we are funded, as I mentioned, we basically rely entirely on sponsorships. And what we really hope is that companies all across the globe will stand up and say, we do support this. We are committed to this. We're committed not only to those members of our own staff or to our own product development, but to this on a global level. And I'll show you later some of the companies that have actually stepped up to the plate and said, you know what, we do support this, and we are willing to put money towards this. What we deliver, so I also wanted to just kind of tell you about some of the other things I just mentioned, like about the coffee calls. That's pretty much very minor, but I host it, so I felt compelled to tell you about things that I do. So one of the things that we try to look at is like development, professional development. We offer a jobs board to the companies that do sponsor us. That jobs board, they can post their own openings, and then it goes out to our distribution list, which is a pretty diverse group. As you can imagine, those people who sign up for free membership and those people who want to be part of our network tend to be a very diverse group. So that jobs board goes to that specific targeted audience. We're also doing research. I'm going to talk about our code of conduct research in just a minute. And we're trying to also collect best practices or good practice to provide resources to people, and especially even to inform a lot of these kinds of sessions where we're talking to people. People are always asking me, what can I do? How can we do things differently? We do a lot of events, obviously, a lot of workshops. We do a lot of meetups. I think I mentioned I'm based in Washington, D.C. Just last week. We did a meetup with Capital One Bank. They hosted us at their headquarters, and it was a Women in Identity event. It was a mixed group, and more than just Capital One folks were there. It was for the D.C. area, and I think people learned a lot, and it was also a really good opportunity to meet other people in the identity industry, in that profession, in the area where you are. We try to do those also around the world. We also try to provide education. Last year, if anyone was at Identiverse, myself and Kim Sutherland, who is also on the global board with me, Kim is with LexisNexis, who is a sponsor of Women in Identity. We did a keynote, and we talked about You know, what does a commitment to diversity look like, especially for people in maybe the C-suite? It's a little different. And myself, I've been CEO of multiple organizations now, and so I went ahead and confessed, you know, my own errors and mistakes, and where I thought I was helping diversity, and I really wasn't. But we really had a great conversation. We try to provide thought leadership. We produce a newsletter that comes out monthly. If any of you are on LinkedIn or you're in social media, we also try to make sure that we are always putting out there the latest research. And so you'll see a lot of research articles talking about a variety of issues in this area. If you get a chance to sign up for those things, I would encourage you to, because it's very educational, and it is amazing how you'll begin to see things you can actually apply right away in your own work. So that takes me to the code of conduct. I should look at my watch. So the identity code of conduct research, closing the identity gap. So I've managed to spend half of my conversation not talking about this, even though that's supposed to be the theme. So let me get right into it. So the code of conduct, the idea, and I feel like sometimes when people hear the code of conduct, they're thinking about how you maybe run your business, how you do your work. This is really about the best way to be diverse, inclusive, all those things in product development. How do you create products that are diverse, right? That are there. Seek to create a practical and pragmatic guide to adopting a diverse and inclusive approach to product development. How do you build in equity? How do you build in accessibility? Right? So it's really focused, I guess, in that sense on products as opposed to how do you manage what you do. I think what we see is management is a factor, right? And is likely going to be one of the principles that we're going to be putting out there. So I don't want to make it sound like that's not important, it is, but we're sort of looking at it through the lens of the things that we're developing. That's where we need to make sure that diversity and inclusion are included, right? So in this code of conduct research, where we decided to start was digital identity in financial services. And with the research, we decided to focus on specific markets. We wanted to do a more developed economy, so we chose the UK. And we also wanted to look at all these same issues in an emerging economy. So we chose Ghana. And a lot of the reports and things are going to be online, so I really encourage you to take a look at them. So we kind of looked at what's the potential here if we can address this. An estimated 6 million people are not able to obtain a digital identity in the UK. So I'm going to give you the UK numbers right now, and I'm definitely not going to give you Ghana because we'll be here till 9:30. So that's about 6 million in the UK itself, right? And this is for those of you who may have sat in on any of the OIX sessions here. Nick Mottershaw and Shai, I know, are both here from OIX. This is based on their inclusion and data set report of 2021. The GDP of the UK in 2002 was 2 trillion British pounds. If you multiply the lower 3% potential growth by the proportion of people in just one country that are affected by this identity gap, that comes to about 2.266 trillion pounds. If anyone's ever tried to do the conversion rate between Great Britain pounds and US dollars, it's significantly more US dollars. We're talking a lot of money here, right? So if we could include the 6 million people in the UK that are currently excluded, we could potentially increase the GDP in the UK alone by about 66 million pounds in 1 year. So the potential there is to do some really good things. You could do good things for altruistic reasons, or you could do good things because it makes you more money in the grand scheme. So either way, it's kind of a win-win, right? So that's the potential. So the code of conduct, we divided the research into 6 phases. The first one was to do a summary of the problem, right? A problem statement, the evidence that supports that. We've already built something, and you can read something on this, but that's the kind of thing that we're continuing to inform, right? As we get more and more data, we gather more and more evidence, we want to make sure that we keep that up to date, so the statement of the problem is very realistic. Oh, yes? Oh, I have 5 minutes. Okay. The next phase was to look at the human impact of identity exclusion. That's been done. That's on the website. That's where it's a combination of a written report and then all of these video interviews. I would encourage you, if you have the time, to look at both. Watch us talking to you. The other thing that we just published this week, just for identifiers, is our literature review. That's been completed now. And our next step is will happen in 2023, where we're going to begin to do roundtables and have those kinds of discussions. And then we're hoping to then develop a more granular analysis of the economic value, the growth, the investment opportunities in 2023 and 24, so that in 2024, we'll actually be able to put together an implementation framework where you can see what are the principles of this code of conduct, and then people can begin to take it and activate it. That's the goal by the end of 2024. This is about the literature review. The authors were these two folks from University of Pennsylvania and University of London. I would encourage you to go to the Women in Identity website, where you can find that. That's the front cover of the literature review. It summarizes some of the emerging trends. It gives examples of digital identity, how it's working in practice. And the Women in Identity site, which I should have told you, is just womeninidentity.org. So this last piece, the last couple things I guess I wanted to leave you with is a call to action, and encourage you. I hope that you, because you're here, are interested in this issue, that you are inspired to take action. One is, we would love to have you join us and support the Code of Conduct. That's the kind of thing we can't do without money. We can't do the research without money. I would love to just have everyone say, oh, we'll volunteer all our time. That's not going to happen. So we also need some experts. So if you'd like to volunteer your expertise because you have something that would really contribute to this, we would love to have you volunteer with us. We would love to have you sponsor us and benefit from and be a part of this whole research initiative that we're taking on, and to help drive the identity ecosystem to become more inclusive. And I would encourage you, if you're not already, to become a member. It's easy. Go to the website and join. It doesn't cost you anything. You'll begin to get the information. You know what? You can be a lurker. You can just get the newsletter and read what we're doing and all those kinds of things. Or if you do that and you say, you know what? I'd kind of like to be a part of that. Volunteer. We need all the help we can get. And it would really help, I think, the identity community as a whole. As I mentioned, our goal is by 2024 to have this economic impact report, and we really want to have people engaged with that. That's my contact information. So I have a contact in my day job, and you may know me from that. I also have a Women in Identity email. Dr. Sarah Walton has been our interim program manager, but she also has a leadership role in the Code of Conduct specifically. She'd be happy to talk to you. And then just to kind of give you some ideas, these are some of our current sponsors. A silver sponsorship is just a couple $1,000s, so it's not a whole lot of money. And there's a little bit less that we probably do with those folks. Gold begins to be some real money with people who have stepped up to the plate for that. Like I just mentioned to you, I did an event last week with Capital One. So we do a lot of things with those kind of folks. Platinum is the highest level, and those companies are really the ones who are engaged with us in supporting the Code of Conduct research. So it's a smaller number who've committed a lot more dollars, but have also committed experts and so on to help us. So that's where we are. I hope that was helpful. I don't know if I don't think I have any time for questions. I'm so sorry, but thank you all for coming.